And we're back. You'll notice I already have things written down underneath my words. That's just going through the book and writing down the grammar and some of the words I wasn't sure about, or like quemque. There's so many keywords. I want to make sure I have the right one, so I looked it up just to double check. And anything you look up, you should write down. You're spending time. You're sort of investing time. I think you want to make it count later. If you had to look it up when you're going through at home, you're probably still going to need to know it when you come to class. So you want to write down anything that you need to look up. So, trium mensum, the book told me, is a genitive of measurement of time, which is sort of a ridiculous genitive, but I'll take it. So trium and mensum, it's that genitive plural that end in it's really easy to mistake that as an accusative. So, if you see an and you think it's accusative, but that doesn't make sense, genitive's the next thing you go for. That third declension genitive plural is So it's a measurement of time. So for 3 months, I guess that's how long of time. Molita kibaria, which is a very cute phrase. Molita means ground up, and kibaria means things that are related to food. So the book told me that means flour, which makes sense. So ground up foodies is what I wrote down to remind myself of the two things that go together to make flour. So later, when I'm reviewing this, I remember not just that those two words mean flour, but sort of how they go together. Kibaria is like kibbutz, but it's not the word food, it's the word things that are related to food. So for 3 months, ground up foodies. Sibi, the book told me, is a dative of reference, which is a lame dative. Every dative is really a dative of reference. Basically, anytime you just say a normal to or for someone, like I made a cake for you, that's a dative of reference. I gave a book to you, that's a dative of reference. It's the most basic dative there is. Quemque, I looked up, because there are so many keywords. Quemque is each one. And it's really the word quisque, and it's the word sort of qui quod, but it has an ending on it. And you'll notice quemque, the middle of the word changes. The em in the middle tells us it's accusative. So the que is not the thing that changes for case. The first part is the thing that changes for case, which is kind of confusing. It's hard to see sometimes. Domo, ablative place from which. Again, with home, you don't use prepositions. So this is really e domo or ex domo, from home, but there's no preposition with the word home. Effere is really ex and fere, to carry. So to carry something out. What happens to the X is it turns into an F. So you have two Fs. Because of something called assimilation. Assimilation is where you make things easier to pronounce. So instead of saying exfere, you say effere, only because it's easier to say. But that F is really an X, that first F. Okay, we have to go to our next page. Ubent. Oh, okay. They order. And again, that's present tense. Ubeo, ubere is second conjugation. So the E is the just regular present tense E. So you notice I've gone through each word and looked at it, figured out its grammar, figured out what it means. I don't try to translate just off the bat, because you always get yourself into a pickle that way. So of 3 months, or we said for 3 months really, because it's a measurement of time. Ground up flour for themselves, each one, from home, to carry, they order. Okay, so we can do that. They order, each person, to carry out from home flour for 3 months for themselves. There's a lot of different ways you can put this sentence together, have it be in good English, as long as you get each word in there. So they order, each person, to carry 3 months, or food for 3 months for themselves from home, is another way. You can say, and it sounds good in English, but it still follows the grammar of the Latin. The molita cibari is the thing that they're carrying. They're carrying out food for themselves, flour, I guess really, flour for themselves for 3 months from home. Each one for themselves. The for themselves is the sibi, the dative of reference. Sibi is reflexive. That means it goes back to the subject. So they don't carry it for someone else, they carry it for themselves. Okay. Persuadent. Ooh, that scared me. Persuadent reracis et tulingis et latobringis venitimis, uti eodem usi concilio, opidis suis vincisque auxustis una cum eis proficiscantur. That's our first verb, so we can stop. Persuadent, well, that's our first verb really. They persuade. And remember, in Latin, you're persuasive to someone. So the people that you persuade are in the dative case. And then we have a series of datives. So that's pretty nice. Rauraki, and the tulingi, and the latobringi, finitimis. Finitimis means they're on the finis, right? They're on the border. So in Latin, you say like borderers, but in English you would say neighbors. So they persuaded the Raurakis, the Tulingis, and the Latobringis neighbors, right? Their neighbors. Okay, what did they persuade them to do? Uti is like ut. It's the same, really. They persuaded these people that, because persuadeo introduces indirect commands. Okay? So the ut is the part of the indirect command. And this is a really strange little sentence to end 1-5. Eodem usi concilio. Usi means the use. And in English we say the use of something. But in Latin, it's always followed by an ablative, so the use by something or the use with something. And that's eodem concilio. That with the use of the same plan, opidis suis vicisque exustis. The book told me is an ablative absolute. So we have nouns in the ablative, opidis and vicis, which we just saw, towns and villages. And we have a participle in the ablative as well, exustis. And then suis just describes opidis, their own towns. So that with the use of the same plan, remember, with the noun having been verbed, with their own towns and villages having been burned. Exustis is to burn something up. The X is really the away, like to burn it away. And the ustis is actually the burn part of the verb. So with their own towns and villages having been burnt, una, which we've seen a few times, together or as one. You don't say both, you just pick whichever one you like. As one, cum, and then the Latin library had eis, but I think it's really eis. Cum is a preposition. Cum's always followed by an ablative. And usually if it's people, it's an ablative of accompaniment, right, to accompany someone. So cum eis is with them, and that's a nice little ablative of accompaniment. So together with them, proficiscantur. Proficisco is a third conjugation deponent, so that a is really the present subjunctive a. Right? Third conjugations turn into an a in the present subjunctive. And it's in this uti indirect command clause. They might go out. They might set forth. So that these neighbors, like, they persuaded them to set forth with the use of the same plan, with their towns and villages having been burnt up, together with them. And the Eis refers back to the Helvetii, with the Helvetii. Boiosque, blah blah blah. Okay, I'm not going to read it. Boios are people, the Boii, and the os tells us they're accusative. And the qui just is a relative pronoun. So it gives us a relative clause, who. So anytime you have a relative pronoun, it refers back to someone in the main sentence. Okay, it's a dependent clause. It depends on the main sentence. The thing it refers back to is called the antecedent, antecedent. It's always a good practice to identify what the antecedent is. So when you say, like, the girl who is washing her hair, the girl is the antecedent of who. It's what we're referring back to. So boios is the antecedent for the qui, for the relative pronoun. So the boii, who transrenem, across the Rhine, incoluerant. Again, you have a u, which is a perfect vowel that we see in perfect stems a lot, and then erant, pluperfect, who across the Rhine had inhabited, who had lived across the Rhine, et in agrum noricum transierant. Remember, in, this is one of the only prepositions that can be followed by an ablative or an accusative. And when it's followed by an accusative, like agrum, it means into. So who had lived across the Rhine and who into the field Noricum, the Noric field. Transierant. Another pluperfect. Trans means across. The I is the go, and then the erant is your ending. That tells you the tense. So who had gone across into a Noric field or the Noric field? Well, probably, since that doesn't make any sense, right? You don't just go into a field as a people. It probably means territory, because that makes more sense. Who had gone across into the Noric territory. And Noream que appugnabant, and who were fighting Norea, which must be a people or a place, but I'm not familiar with them. I'll have to look that up. And the last part is the weirdest part. So we don't know anything about the boios yet. We know they're accusative, but we don't have our verb. And the boios who did all this stuff, receptos ad se socios sibi ad giscunt. Ad giscunt, yeah. This is what happened. Okay, receptos is another accusative, so it must describe the boios. Received, ad se, to themselves. Socios is it's another accusative, a great example of an appositive. Sort of, they received as allies. Socios are allies. And we get the word social from it. In Roman history, there was a social war, which sounds like you're fighting with your friends, but really it's kind of like you're fighting your allies. You're fighting other people in Italy. It's called the social war. Received to themselves as allies, for themselves, sibi, ad giscunt, which I hardly ever say. It's very hard for me to say. It means they admitted. They admitted the boii, so it's our accusative, received to themselves as allies, for themselves. If you can tell in English, that is very strange. And the book will admit it too. It says, the boii, having been admitted among themselves, is awkward English. Generally, English prefers a subordinate clause in the active. After they had received the boii, as allies. So I would assume that's a fine translation, because the Latin is so awkward when you translate it to English. So bring any questions you have or anything you didn't understand and need to go over again, and your Aeneid stuff to class, and I'll see you later.